The question around whether or not the voting age should be lowered is a question that many people have been asking themselves for the past couple of years and even beyond that. NDP MP Taylor Bachrach is one of the people behind the movement to do so. His private members bill is setting out to do just that. His private members bill will be going before the House of Commons on Wednesday for 1 hour of debate. And he's joining me now to discuss that. MP Bachrach, thanks so much for your time today. Perhaps we can just start out with, obviously, lowering the voting age has been, a question that many people have been asking themselves whether or not we should or shouldn't do it for quite some time now. Why do you think now is ultimately the time to do so? And what are some of, I guess, your main points that, you would say are benefits of lowering the voting age?
For sure. Well, first of all, thanks, Wyatt, for having me on your show, and thanks for your interest in this topic. You asked the question, why now? And I think that's a really important question. When we look around the world at democracies, we can see that democracy is fragile. And I believe that we need to do everything we can as a country to shore up our democracy, to make our democratic system stronger. Now, when I ask people about things that make a democracy stronger, I think most people agree that having a high participation rate is something that is really a hallmark of a strong democracy. And so lowering the voting age is one of the ways we can bring young people into the conversation about the future of our country and make our democratic system stronger. So, talking a little bit about some of the benefits, and like you said, this is something that it's a conversation that's been going on in different countries for a long time, and certainly here in Canada for quite a while as well. The reason I brought this bill forward is, first of all, because I really believe in young people. I've met so many incredible young people over my decade or so in politics. And I have two teenage daughters. They're 17 and 15. I think they're amazing and would really, they would make excellent voters. And I think, more than anything, that we have this opportunity right now to do something that strengthens our country and brings those young voices into the conversation. So, we look around the world, there are a bunch of countries that have done this relatively recently. Scotland and Austria are two examples. Tomorrow night here in Ottawa, I'm going to be hosting a professor from Scotland who's going to talk about their experience. And one of the things that they saw in the Scottish example was that the voter participation rate among 16 and 17-year-olds really went up as a result of the change to lowering the voting age. And so, one of the key arguments is that when young people vote for the first time, while they're still living at home, while they're still in that stable environment, they're still at home, they're still in school, those are really good conditions for, for getting people to vote for the first time. And if they vote for the first time, the chance of them voting for a second time is even better. The trend that we see, unfortunately, and, countries lowered the voting age from 21 to 18 back. Canada did it back in 1970, and around that time, a bunch of countries were doing the same thing. Now, what we've found over time is that 18 is not a good age to have young people vote for the first time. It's a time when there's a lot of upheaval in people's lives, when they're moving away from home, they're entering the workforce, they're going to school, and there are a lot of things competing for their attention. So those are all reasons why lowering the voting age to 16 is a way we can reverse some of those troubling trends around first-time voter participation.
And what have been some of, the counter arguments? Because obviously that's one of the key things about, when a, bill gets put in front of, the House of Commons. Obviously, there's going to be some people who support it, and there may be some people who don't support it, obviously, depending on the topic. What have been some of the counter arguments that you've heard, about your bill, and how do you plan to, convince those MPs who may bring up, various counter arguments when your bill is being debated on Wednesday that, this is something that should be done?
Yeah, a fair question. So one of the counter arguments is that when you go out and talk to 16 and 17-year-olds, it's not unanimous that they all want to become voters. And I think that's a really interesting one because, the fact is that we haven't given those young people an ability to participate in the process. And as a result, many of them haven't really given it much thought because it's simply not been an option. So, when I talk 16 and 17-year-olds, when I talk to them about the bill and walk them through some of the arguments in favor, a lot of them say, well, yeah, if we had the opportunity to vote, we would probably pay more attention to politics and we would spend more time thinking about what decisions we would make as voters. But honestly, Wyatt, and this has been a bit disappointing. I would say the majority of the opposition to this idea is based on stereotypes of young people that are inaccurate, and some of them are discriminatory. Frankly, it's like an example of ageism that some people, unfortunately, have a dim view of the place that young people play in our society. And I take a contrary view. I feel really optimistic and positive about young people in Canada and what they can contribute to our system. And I would love to see them brought into the conversation in a formal way. And that's why I brought this forward.
You mentioned some of the stereotypes that, some people have. Obviously, one of those would be, I guess, the education piece around it and making sure that, young people are, making an educated vote and, not just a vote because that's based off of, let's say, maybe what, people in their family vote for or something, maybe because they saw on social media. I mean, I guess, how do you plan to, tackle those stereotypes, and how do you prove that those stereotypes aren't true? And furthermore, I mean, if someone were to bring up, let's say, the education stereotype, I mean, how do you make sure that younger people specifically who will be going to vote have the same level of knowledge around civics and voting as someone at any age level would?
Yeah, great questions. So first of all, I'm a huge advocate for strong civics education in school. And, I know right now in my home province of British Columbia, young people I think they get some curriculum in grade 6, and they might get a little bit in grade 10 or grade 11, but there isn't very much emphasis on learning about our electoral system, learning about how Parliament works and how our country functions. So I really support any efforts, regardless of whether we lower the voting age. I think the more emphasis we can place on encouraging people to explore the ideas of what it means to be a citizen, the better. But I also think that there's a real overestimation of how much information you need to be a voter. I talked to lots of people and about the voting process, obviously during elections, going door to door and talking to people. I don't think most adults necessarily really look at an extensive amount of information on the party's platforms and list the pros and cons of each of the policies and make a decision. It's much more nuanced than that. A lot of people vote because their peer group is voting a certain way. Like, I don't know if the stereotype that young people, 16 and 17-year-olds, are more impressionable. I don't know if that really bears out in reality. The reality is that we're all impressionable and we're all affected by social influences. And so I don't think that should be the primary consideration when thinking about whether or not we should lower the voting age. At the same time, like I said before, the more education, the better, the more literacy, the better, the more we can get Canadians of all ages thinking about the party's platforms and the policy choices. I think that's all good. But I don't know how much I don't believe it should be used as a reason to exclude young people from the conversation. And the last thing I'll say on that is that actually, because 16 and 17-year-olds are closer to the time that they spent in high school talking about civics, the evidence has shown that many of them are more politically aware and more politically informed than young people who are 18 or 19, who may not have had a civics class for 5 years, and they just frankly aren't tuned into those things. So the reality is a bit more nuanced than the stereotype of the younger you are, the more ignorant you are, and the older you are, the more informed you are. I don't think that always bears out.
Okay, NDP MP Taylor Bachrach, thanks so much for joining me and for explaining your private member's bill on lowering the voting age and for providing some of your insight.
Thanks so much, Wyatt. I really appreciate the interest. And like you mentioned earlier, it's coming up for its first hour of debate on Wednesday. One of the reasons I brought this forward is because it's been supported by many different parties over the years. So I'm really hopeful that we'll get a majority of MPs in the House to support its passage, at least get it to committee where we can study it and hear some of the evidence from around the world. So thanks again for the interest and have a wonderful evening.